What's up, Internet? It is a magical time that is dawning upon us. A brand new Pokemon game is coming out, and while there is some controversy about some stuff and things and whatever, as someone who had grown up with Pokemon being in their target demographic all the way back in the start, I feel a certain kinship with the series. So I thought it would be fun to sort of do something to celebrate that. And unfortunately, my RF is still out of commission, so I can't continue my Pokemon Ruby playthrough just yet. Don't hit me! But I thought what might be fun would be looking back at the series and talking about my favorite monsters in all of Pokemon. Now, I want to stress this ahead of time. This is going to be my list of my 10 most favorite monsters. Not necessarily the statistically best, because I don't use the statistically best anything, and honestly, if all you use is the statistically best anything, you're probably playing a very boring game. No, I'm talking about the guys I like the best. My top 10 favorites. The other thing I'd like to say before we get into this proper, like I kind of mentioned, my RF is kind of out of commission, so relevant footage will probably be non-existent, and for that I apologize. Again, don't hit me. Anyway, with that said, these are my top 10 favorite Pokemon of all time, to celebrate the fact that we have another Pokemon game coming out. Starting out with number 10, with a bullet. You knew this guy was going to have to be on the list. Mewtwo. Seriously, this guy is an absolute badass. He is a powerhouse, and he is an absolute beast in pretty much all regards, but that's not why I like this guy so much. First of all, he's entirely iconic, although I much prefer how he used to look as sort of like this bumpy, sort of mangly monster mess that could just destroy the entire world with a thought, rather than this smooth plush thing that looks like they redesigned him so you'd want to hug him more than run in terror. I don't get what that's about. I like his classic style. Shoutouts to Mewtwo X for bringing it back. But what really stands out to me, aside from just the raw sheer power of this guy, is what he stands for. He's a super boss, and he feels like it. When you beat the Elite Four in Pokemon Red, proving that you are emphatically the very best, like no one ever was, well, you might continue your Pokemon adventure, wandering from town to town, building up your team, and finding new monsters you haven't caught before. But wait! There's a cave. You've never explored it. There used to be a person in front of it, you're sure, but now they're gone. Mystery envelops you. You go in to take a look, and oh my god, everything is ridiculously high leveled. And why is this one room really confusing? And what is that thing? Oh no! Yeah. That's Mewtwo. And not only is he an absolute powerhouse, which he is, not only is he the highest level monster you can fight in the game, which he is, not only can he recover every ounce of damage you inflict on him, which he can, he just stands as this giant pinnacle of strength and terror as you descend into the mystery that is this cave. And what's better is when you add him to your team, he is one of the most destructive forces you could ever wreak havoc with. Yeah, he's terrifying to fight in all regards, but fighting with him, oh, it's empowering. Mewtwo stands as being the second most powerful monster I've seen in Pokemon Red. Not so subtle, hint for later. Moving on to number 9. I love Generation 2 a lot. I was really excited for when it came out. I was so excited because they added so many new monsters and stuff, and I just wanted to explore everything new this game had to offer. But as my recent review and playthrough of Pokemon Crystal had pointed out, go see those if you haven't already, pretty much all the new monsters and stuff aren't available until after you beat the game. And I remember the first time playing this, I was walking through just looking for new monsters to add to my team because I didn't want another Rattata or a Pidgey or whatever. I remember I had a Wooper on my team and I was thoroughly disappointed, even though Axolotls are adorable. And I remember being thoroughly disappointed in Chikorita because I was that one dumb kid who took Chikorita for some reason. But then I remember wandering near a forest and seeing this adorable little sheepy thing, and I just knew I had to have that on my team because I just wanted to give it a big ol' hug. And little did I know that adorable little sheepy would turn into the most badass dinosaur that would shoot lightning out of its eyes ever, because Ampharos is amazing. Seriously, I love Ampharos, and I think it is probably one of the coolest Gen 2 monsters out there, bar none, and certainly the coolest electric type there will ever be. Take that, Pikachu, you overhyped piece of mouse nonsense. No thank you. Keep it real with Ampharos. Also, why did Pokemon Crystal remove Ampharos? It's bull. Moving on. As we move to number 8, we stay in the second generation, but the story takes a turn back to the first. I ended up going to various daycares when I was a kid, and when I went to this one daycare, there was this kid who was much older than me. He was kind of a bully, and he decided one day to be super nice and tell me about this free Pokemon you could get in Pokemon Red. It was just sitting on a table. He then proceeded to take my Game Boy from me, take this monster down to the Celadon store to buy a Firestone, and force me to get a Flareon, and then save. Thanks for that, Lee. And Flareon began my affair with absolutely hating Eevee. The second time I played, I got a Vaporeon, which was significantly cooler, but underwhelming. And the third playthrough, while I did get a Jolteon and I thought it was better, it wasn't until literally last year's playthrough of Pokemon Red, again, go watch that I really learned how awesome Jolteon can be. Well, starting in Gen 2, they added 2 new monsters that could evolve from Eevee. Monsters that could only evolve through a special means, by playing with them, by fighting with them, by spending time with them, by building up your friendship with them, making them feel like real creatures. And that was very powerful, for a lot of reasons, especially if you were like me and didn't have any friends. So going on my adventures with my little Eevee, eventually it would transform, and many people absolutely love the transformation Espeon, but not me. I gotta keep it real with my girl Umbreon over here. The best Eevee evolution of all time. Sure, it's defensive oriented and not very good at it. Sure, it doesn't have many great attacks, but damn if it's not one of the most beautiful and mysterious looking monsters I've ever seen, and by far the monster that made me kind of fall in love with the Eevee. Moving on to number 7. Like I said at the top, I was Pokemon's target demographic when it first came out. I was always super excited when a new one came out. I could not contain my joy. But at some point, Generation 4, I ended up being really disenfranchised with this series. It felt like they just sort of gave up with their Pokemon designs. And I mean, we live in a world where stuff like a garbage bag monster exists for reasons I cannot fathom. And yes, that new Ponyta is absolutely adorbs, but at the same time, I could just point out that it's 4 existing Pokemon smacked together. My point is, since Generation 4, it feels like the people designing monsters have completely given up, and since then, I have not really been all that excited about new Pokemon, honestly. So you'll absolutely imagine my surprise when a few days before Pokemon Sun and Moon came out, I looked over some of the new monsters and found one that absolutely resonated, just on design alone. It was a design of a monster that looked like a mishmash of pretty much everything thrown together. It didn't have a lot of color, and it looked kind of like it was depressed, like the entire world had given up on it. There was something about this monster that really hit home with me. Like, it was just there trying to do its best, and yet no one gave it a chance. When I saw that monster, I knew I had to have it in my party. I knew it had to be sort of my flagship monster for the series. So you can imagine how pissed off I was that it wasn't available until after you beat the game. That said, I added Type Null to my party, and I fought with it non-stop and became one of my favorite monsters of all time until it evolved and became Silvally, a monster that is both beautiful and noble, and yes, you could just call him knockoff Diet Arceus all you like, but, you know, this guy might not have the power Arceus has. He's got way more heart. He's a beautiful monster that finally became what he was because it felt like he had a connection to someone that cared about him. And something about that is just beautiful to me. I love Silvally so much that it is by far one of my favorite monsters. In fact, it's probably like the one monster since Generation 3 that's really been special to me. So the long and short of it is Silvally is freaking awesome. But unfortunately for Silvally, you can only have a team of 6. Seriously, add a 7th slot, please. Please, 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 please. We move on to Generation 4. Now, you may recall that Generation 4 kind of sucked. I personally remember it quite well how bad it sucked. I remember it being short. I remember it being not terribly interesting with its monster designs. I remember it feeling like the series basically gave up at that point. And with some few exceptions, it feels like it's still in that rut, but that's neither here nor there. One thing, and it's literally the one thing I will ever credit Generation 4 for doing, is it went back and it updated existing Pokemon by giving new evolutions. And that's important, because every time you add more monsters, well, you're going to have overlap with older ones, and they're going to become redundant. Thank you, Deoxys, for ruining Mewtwo, by the way. Well, Generation 4 happened to have a monster that was an evolution of a very special Generation 3 monster for me. We're talking about Gallade. I'm sorry, you took Gardevoir and made him a freaking samurai. How was I not going to love this guy? Everything about him screams awesome to me. Which leads us quite comfortably into number 5. Generation 3 was my favorite generation of all time. I think it's one of the most beautiful to this day. It's one of the most content-filled, and while I certainly wish it would have previous generation areas in it, similarly to Gen 2. What can you do? Well, one of my favorite monsters in 3rd generation was this little obscure monster you might not have been able to find because it was really rare, unless you were an asshole named Wally who ran into it in his first fight. We're talking about Gardevoir, otherwise known as we remade Alakazam, but better in every way. If we're not counting Mewtwo, Gardevoir is the pinnacle of why I like psychic types. It ended up kind of resonating with me with how much power it had in it, but also it felt like a really great contrast of design. You have this super powerful psychic who could destroy the entire world and remake the universe as she saw fit, but at the same time, it was in the form of like this elegant woman. There was just something there that was really cool. And seeing it evolve from basically a child to an adult, there was just something there that seemed really kind of very special about it. As opposed to other monsters which just sort of changed forms, this one ended up growing up over time. And that was pretty special to me, which is why not a single playthrough of Gen 3 goes by where I don't have a Gardevoir on my team. She has excellent moves, she has amazing styles. The only thing I don't like about her, aside from how hard she is to find if you're not Wally, damn it, is that her passive abilities aren't that great. But otherwise, Gardevoir is probably one of the most powerful and awesome monsters in my opinion. And I mean, let's just be honest. She's basically Alakazam, but without a stupid way to force it to evolve, and you want to give her a big hug because she doesn't have a creepy mustache. Moving on to number 4. Man, Gen 3 was my absolute favorite. But, you know, as much as I love Pokemon Ruby, not a lot of people know this, I didn't exactly go into Gen 3 wanting Ruby. I actually wanted Sapphire. I looked at the monsters on the cover, and Sapphire just looked so much cooler than Ruby's. And I mean, to this date, that's still pretty accurate in pretty much all regards. But I remember at the time, before it was released, I think it was IGN, every day they would do a new article on Gen 3 Pokemon. And that was really cool for me. It meant that I got to be part of, like, the lead up to this release. It's very cool. And I remember reading an article about this monster exclusive to Ruby. It was the first pure steel type of all time. And that was a big deal because while it did ultimately mean it was basically weak to everything, it was unique because there hadn't been one up to this point. And as someone who stupidly took Chikorita in Gen 2, I had an absolute Herculean task of trying to beat the Steel Gym. I had the utmost respect for Steel types. So to see this pure Steel type exist, and it's like this adorable mix between a Venus flytrap and like a little doll in the form of the awesome Mawile, how could I say no to this? Mawile is still my favorite Gen 3 monster of all time. It is adorable and I just want to give it a big ol' hug, but I'd also be afraid of it trying to eat my head, which is a shame because I still want to give it a big hug. Mawile is amazing to me, and this is why I think Pokemon Emerald will always be inferior to Ruby in every way, because let's just be honest, yeah, you can get Mawile in that game, but you gotta pretty much beat the game to get it, and that's no good. Also, contrary to her appearance, she absolutely dominates in toughness contests. Do not underestimate this little lady. Mawile Rex Shop. Moving on to number 3. We gotta go back in time a little bit, all the way back to the first time I ever played Pokemon. Pokemon Red. We are going back to the second monster I ever caught, the second monster I ever ran into. We have, of course, Pidgeot. You can stop laughing. Seriously, please stop. I remember training this little bird from the start and being enamored with it. Yeah, it might not have the most spectacular moveset. Yeah, its stats are subpar, but there's just something about this guy that just screams cool to me. And the fact that it's basically a beginner monster, to see it sort of transform from a little tiny bird to a big, angry, awesome bird, it's very, very cool. Also, I think it was Pokemon Black or White, one of the DS ones, where you could play online. I remember fighting a lot of people online around that time, and everyone laughed at me for using Pidgeot. They then proceeded to leave the arena in a crying, crumpled ball on the floor because they made fun of my Pidgeot. Seriously, don't make fun of Pidgeot. It might have a very simple moveset, might not have the best stats, but it can do some really, really mean things if you let it. You must learn to respect the bird. Moving on to number 2, we have, of course, the first monster I ever ran into and the first monster I ever caught. Walking around near Viridian City, I ended up running into this bizarre, spiky-looking little rabbit thing. Well, I took that rabbit thing home with me, and little did I know he would turn to this angry, awesome, stompy Godzilla beast known as Nidoking. This guy is amazing. He's got incredible potential for moves he can learn. He can learn up to 2 instant kill moves, which if you know what you're doing, you can make sure they guarantee a hit as well. They're kind of awesome like that. You can teach him ice moves, you can teach him earth moves, he's got poison moves, fighting moves. He's pretty much got every single move in the spectrum, as well as, oh yeah, being a giant awesome Godzilla beast. Nidoking is the man. I freaking love this guy. But as we move to the top of the list, number 1, I'd like to remind you, you don't start with 0 monsters. Let me paint a word picture with my mouth here. You are 10. You are leaving your home for the first time. You're about to go walk into some grass when an old man stops you, tells you not to go out there because it's dangerous, and proceeds to kidnap you to his lab. He then presents 3 monsters telling you to take one before you go out on your adventures, and that this will be your best friend for life. The choices: a tiny turtle, a vegetable, and a cross between a flamethrower and a dinosaur. Well, let's just be honest, it took 0 time to make that decision. It was instantaneous. And you took your new best friend and traveled across the world. You fought everything together. And while he was not perfect, having been taught a couple HMs because this is the first time you're playing Pokemon and you don't know better, and having gotten stuck in the Flash Cave because you didn't have Flash to the point where just outside Saffron City you hit level 100 because leveling, well, you realize you've had this special bond with this monster. You realize how much you love your Charizard. There will never be another monster quite like Charizard. Sure, every generation can have a fire type, and 9 times out of 10 they're the coolest one, but none could ever touch the majesty of this winged dragon. This badass flamethrower dinosaur that completely just wrecks everything. A monster that makes Mewtwo pale in comparison, again, possibly because of all that power leveling, but still, it's just that awesome. Charizard is the most special monster for me. He was the one who saw me off at the start of this adventure I've had since I was like 6. Charizard has been with me all the way since the beginning, and I see him follow me quite a ways away into the future. And he will always be my number 1 favorite monster, and I don't think anyone could ever change that. But that is my top 10 favorite monsters of all time for a series that's lasted almost as long as I have. Monsters that have gone on adventure after adventure with me, have seen me through such perils, and continue to grow with me over the course of my life. And maybe someday they'll get passed on to my kids if they're lucky. Well, that's, for me, the definitive answer. Of course, there's tons more monsters out there. And I want to hear what your top 10 favorite Pokemon of all time are. Whether you're new at the series, old, whether you gave up halfway through, whether you're just starting out. There's got to be some that resonate with you, and I absolutely want to hear about them. Whether you like the way they look, or you like their attack combination, or you're that one guy who has to pick the statistically best ones because, seriously, you're really boring. Try something else, buddy. Just saying. Not to judge, just seriously, try something else. Anyway, I want to hear what your favorite Pokemon are down in the comments, because that's what that section is for. And before you go, feel free to subscribe to my channel to see more stuff that I do, maybe more top 10s. I've been planning a couple, but I've never had the time to really do them. See other reviews I've done, including Pokemon stuff, because I've got a lot of that, although stuff's sort of ground to the halt at the moment. I'm sorry. I'm getting on it. And if you really want to make my day, check out the show's Patreon or PayPal and support the show any way you can so that I can continue to do things like reminisce about my favorite monsters and hopefully share some of my very special Pokemon experiences with you in the future. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this list, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, Internet.